It's that time again, everyone! Welcome back to And Just Like Crap, a snarky recap and review of Sex and the City sequel series And Just Like That. Let's start with a shock. I kinda like this episode. Don't drop your half-full Snapple bottles of suspiciously yellow liquid though. It wasn't all good. Let's get into it. We open on Carrie to the strains of Yazoo's Only You, because nobody's written a song yet called Only You until you unexpectedly drop dead. She and Aiden's 5-year relationship hiatus turns out to be just a long-distance deal, and their no-contact rule actually involves quite a lot of contact, including blank postcards to symbolize their enduring love. Empty, easily misinterpreted, and reusable. Sounds right to me. There's also the moment when Carrie eats total shit on her shiny new hallway floor.
Finish her!
I don't have anything insightful to say about it. I just enjoyed it. Anyway, let's talk about the elephant's trunk in the room. Aiden calls unexpectedly to conjure up some 90s nostalgia, by which I mean have awkward phone sex. While I could just about deal with the implication that Aiden's joking it at the wheel, the point at which he licked his hand got a full-on retch out of me. Achievement unlocked, AJLT. Carrie's not into it either, mostly because Kitten's shoe is staring at her. And apparently she can only concentrate on one pussy at a time. She gives up after a second try, which is similarly ruined by her nemesis and Aiden's son, Wyatt, who apparently requires his dad to sleep in bed with him at the age of 13. There's a lot of land on that farm, and the police surely can't check it all. That's all I'm saying. Unable to get to sleep alone, Carrie resumes writing for the first time in months and takes her first tentative steps into fiction, which I'm sure is going to result in something truly awful, but right now we need to talk about this hat. I thought things couldn't get any worse after last season's sleeping bag coat, but I genuinely didn't see this Little Miss Moffat bullshit coming. And for that, I apologise. This season, Miranda, now a card-carrying lesbian living in an Airbnb, is out on the prowl, which for once doesn't mean the discovery of a fresh corpse down by the docks. Instead, she's hitting the local scene in search of a pair of baps between which she can sandwich herself, to limited success. It's on one of these excursions that she bumps into Cassandra, an old babysitter of Brady's whose style demonstrates that the people making this show last saw a non-celebrity lesbian in roughly 1994. Hold your f***ing horses though, because I've got something positive to say. This is, I think, the first time the show has directly addressed the sometimes grim realities of post-youth pickup culture, and actually handled it with a degree of non-preachy nuance. And it leads to a meet-cute with similarly invisible tourist Mary, delightfully underplayed with a hint of pious crazy by Rosie O'Donnell. Of course, the show can't allow a sweet moment to stand, and so drives a Subaru through it in the next scene, by revealing that Mary is actually an overly attached nun, on a quest to worship at the altar of the Velvet Glove. And Miranda just unwittingly punched her V-card, which, as indiscretions committed by members of the clergy go, ranks pretty low. While Miranda is sympathetic to Sister Mary Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit's relatable journey of self-discovery, Carrie takes several smug potshots at the nun's love for NYC tourist traps. Like she didn't piss her pants the second she clapped eyes on the Eiffel Tower. It all culminates in a gentle Times Square letdown where Miranda gets backhanded by a giant gorilla, and Mary blasts out a few bars of For Good from Wicked before they part ways. Hopefully there's time for reshoots before the second part of the movie version is released, because that would kill in the cinema. This week in Who Gives a Shit news, Seema continues her trend of early season dumping when she ejects movie director and long-distance boyfriend Ravi's necktie-wearing behind because she isn't a priority to him. But it could equally be because he and everyone around him are doing horrific faux English accents which tow a previously unexplored line between cutting glass and sucking ass. Good riddance. Lisa is still talking about her documentary, which has now morphed into a series for PBS. They're unimpressed by her entry-level PowerPoint presentation and demand that her series on unsung black women feature the famously well-sung Michelle Obama. I'd a guess because they've managed to secure a cameo sometime this season and needed a place to put it. While we're mercifully Brady-free in this episode, we do have to spend some time with Charlotte's rancid kids. Rock interjects several times to remind us that they've learned some new progressive talking points from TikTok, and Lily's got her eye on a ballet dancer. And I don't care. Having apparently given up entirely on finding something meaningful for Charlotte and Harry to do, almost all of the York Goldenblatt's screen time this episode is taken up by their dog, Richard Burton. Which I don't have an issue with. I'm just reporting the news. Mr. Burton, a British bulldog, is falsely accused of roughing up Chihuahua Peanut at the dog park by the latter's owner, the gloriously scenery-chewing Jane. But at the risk of offending, Peanut's breed alone should have been a tell that Jane might not be a reliable witness. I've been in the company of Chihuahuas, and the only things those dogs think about are treats and how much they want to kill you. It doesn't look good for old Richard when Charlotte pays things forward by baselessly accusing her dog walker of neglect, and trying to leave the unwitting canine in question at a daycare run by a man whose haircut and mustache combo screams, "Don't check my hard drive." She even begins to doubt Lord Burton's innocence when he goes for a collector's item doll at Lisa's place, which she keeps saying smells like pork, but doesn't seem interested in what someone in the family's been doing with it to get it that way. And for that, I am grateful. This throwaway plot ends up with the reveal that Richard was framed when the actual culprit shows up at the dog park. And it transpires that Jane is something of a dog racist. There's a sentence I never thought I'd say. Welcome back to And Just Like Crap, a semi-scathing review and recap of Sex and the City revival series And Just Like That. In this, the sophomore episode of Season 3, things are getting ratty. And for once, I'm not talking about anyone's botched face. Let's get into it. This time, we kick things off with a quick reminder that Lizette, the new owner of Carrie's old apartment, exists. She gifts Carrie a necklace bearing her old apartment number, of a material and style that I feel fairly confident in saying that our erstwhile heroine would rather have fired at her point blank out of a t-shirt cannon than be seen wearing in public. We also get a rare quantifiable check-in with Carrie's out-of-touch wealth, when we see her eyeing a dining table with a price tag of $6,750. I like to imagine that part of Mr. Big's torture, in hell, is knowing that his wife is spending all of his money on furnishing a house for his only real competition. Delicious. Remember last time when I said that Carrie's foray into fiction writing would produce something terrible? Well, it has. As with all of her writing, it's a thinly veiled autobiography, told from a third-person limited perspective, wherein her main character is exclusively and bizarrely referred to as the woman. Let's be honest, there's literally no chance this piece of shit isn't going to end up a success. But I really wish they'd let Carrie fail. Like, properly fail. In a show full of fantastical alt-reality goings-on, her career has always been one of the least realistic depictions of failing upwards outside of the producers. Having to deal with an actual setback would at least keep things interesting. And if you think I'm being harsh, look no further than the fact that she's writing the f***ing thing in 11-point Korea New. neither of which are industry or software standards. She had to have set it to that herself. But do you know what Courier knew is the standard font of? Script writing. Chalk up another fail for the production crew. And then, I'm not done, then there's the reveal that she's writing historical fiction. Carrie Bradshaw, who I wouldn't trust to accurately tell me what happened in her own life yesterday, is going to spin a yarn set before Lincoln was president. F*** me. Luckily, a reverse Disney miracle happens when a swarm of rats, who have seemingly been reading her screen from a distance, dash out of her garden to stop her. This leads to two developments. The first is a widening gap between Carrie and Aiden as she begins to find their poorly defined contact rules confusing and the contact itself underwhelming. The second is the introduction of landscaper Adam, played by Logan Marshall Green. 3 guesses where this is all heading, but for the record, do it, Carrie. Not only because he's fit, but also so you don't have to politely pretend you haven't noticed Wyatt sticking tree ornaments up his arse at Shaw family Christmases.
Boo! You suck!
Apparently, it only took a handful of episodes of Charlotte rediscovering her agency away from her family before the writers decided to make her every waking moment all about them again. She and Lisa are hot on the trail of legendary Ivy Whisperer Lois Fingerhood, played by Kristen Schaal. She's the first of no fewer than 2 characters in this episode whose names are specifically chosen to set up extremely lazy jokes later on. Which is disappointing considering that the start of their quest features a joke with Tim Bagley's headmaster Greg, which is so impressively dark that I can't even tell you what it's about on YouTube. See? They can do it when they want to. The evidently chronically unoccupied pair track college application coach Lois down to her son's Little League game, and convince her to take a run at soon-to-be applicants Herbert Jr. and Lily. Hopefully to make sure they get into good schools as far away from New York as humanly possible. Turns out, Lois is running a covert psyop on overprivileged families, given that her advice basically boils down to Lily pretending to be a white theremin player, and Herbert Jr. pretending to be one of the kids from Dangerous Minds. After the deeply underwhelming payoff of the fingerhood joke offends Lois right out the front door, everything's back where it started. Which is pretty much how most episodes play out for the Goldenblatts these days. Let's see how many times it takes me tempting fate by saying that before Harry's having an affair with Anthony, and Charlotte's traipsing around Bergdorf Goodman stuffed full of love eggs like a dying chicken. This week in Who Gives a Shit news, though it pains me to say it, Anthony's decent character development last season is already being squandered. After his glorified cameo in the premiere, this time we're informed that he's going brick and mortar with his Hot Fellas bakery, complete with bread-themed everything. Charlotte was apparently so busy as to be unaware that Mr. Marantino had this in the offing. See? That's what happens when you have a friend who won't guilt you into selling your prized possessions to fund their personal enterprises. Carrie. Post-Ravi, Seema finds herself tired of the predictable series of men available to her in New York's dating pool. An intervention by business partner Elliot leads her to matchmaker Sydney Cherkov, the second character with a name that exists only for a predictable punchline. Although, if you'd like to see a better use of actress Sherry O'Terry, check out her guest appearance on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend Season 4. Strangely, Sydney's advice is to pretend to be a different person. In this case, as Seema accurately summarizes, the Easter Bunny's side piece. The contradictory message we're left with is that being authentic demonstrably doesn't work, but I guess loneliness is empowering? Thought-provoking stuff. And while we're forced to watch while Lily has a staircase tryst with current crush and ballet dancer Diego, the other Goldenblatt child, Rock, doesn't even appear in this episode. So, you know, swings and roundabouts. Miranda continues to explore her newly defined identity this episode, largely through her burgeoning obsession with thinly veiled Love Island parody by Bingo. An overheard conversation about it at a typically bougie lunch. Actually, let's talk about that lunch. I'm assuming the place itself is real, but it appears to be somewhere you go to be served a bowl of plain tortilla chips, and then a waitress comes over with a serving station and hands you a bowl of sides, all mixed together? Is this objectively insane, or am I just not rich enough to understand it? Don't answer that. Anyway, said waitress is also a Buy Bingo aficionado, and Miranda takes this to be a sign that there's more than guacamole on the menu. I'll give you some time to make your own disgusting joke about that. There we go. Well done. What Miranda hasn't accounted for is that an accurate gaydar is something that takes a lifetime to properly hone. And for most of us, it's about not having your teeth kicked in after 30 seconds of light flirting. Not establishing how receptive service industry workers would be to you vaulting the salsa stand to garnish their taco. By the way, that was my contribution to the disgusting joke contest. It's during the ensuing conversation that we get one of several hints that the writers have been dropping since last season that they are very aware of the online discourse about their creation. Miranda enthuses about the wonders of hate watching, which feels odd. Kind of like a decorator painting a wall with their own shit, and assuming that the horrified homeowner is just fascinated by the brushwork. When the waitress turns out to be straight and married, remember that, Miranda? Ms. Hobbes falls back on a sure thing, which gives us the return of BBC producer Joy. Carrie encourages Ms. Hobbes to ignore her reservations and go for it, which should be a bad enough sign to make her run screaming in the opposite direction. Time will tell. Welcome back to And Just Like Crap, a review and recap of Sex and the City revival series And Just Like That, which answers the age-old question, what if an Englishman said a lot of mean things about a mostly terrible TV show? And this episode is a real return to form. Because it was pretty bad. Buckle up and let's get into it. If any of you were hoping that Carrie's adventure in fiction writing would wind up being one of And Just Like That's forgotten plots, I'm gonna have to disappoint you. Her book editor, Amanda, unhelpfully suggests that she make her latest travesty a fantasy romance. The fantasy component being the idea that anybody would actually read this tripe. We also discover that both Google and South by Southwest are trying to book Carrie for speaking engagements. I'm not even going to dignify that with a rant, so instead, I'll just say, f*** right off. Doesn't matter anyway, because Carrie fobs off both of those incredibly overgenerous offers in favour of a panel on memoirs in Virginia. Because that's where her boyfriend lives. And while she's there, she can go see the... oh. Or maybe the... oh dear. And there's the... Jesus Christ, Virginia. Then she gets a call from Aiden's ex-wife Kathy asking her to traffic down some ADHD meds because that's a totally normal thing to ask the bookend at both sides of your marriage to do. But we'll come back to that later. For now, let's marvel at how Kathy's saved in the phone as... Kathy Aiden's wife. Another win for the old Bradshaw creativity there. Unless it's an even lazier piece of writing than I thought, and they're trying to tell us that her maiden name is Kathy Aiden's wife. I was almost distracted from that shoddy production design by the bag lying next to it. Looks like she took a bland clutch out shopping with her in 1995 and got caught in an explosion at the Nature Company. Carrie ends up trekking out to Virginia with Seema, where they eat KFC wings on their hotel towels. So, if you ever lose your mind, vacation in rural Williamsburg, and wonder why your hair smells like a chicken's greasy asshole after your morning shower, now you know. Miss Bradshaw really wants to stay at Aiden's place, but also really wants Aiden to offer so that she doesn't have to ask. which is, at least, consistent with her usual behaviour. And he doesn't ask until he's forced to rescue her from car trouble, at which point a series of very strange things happen. In a super sketchy scene, Aiden reveals that he and his sons, apparently, have a nightly routine in which they lay out exactly what will happen the next day. And since Carrie wasn't already on the schedule, that means she can't stay in the main house. Almost like an unwanted house guest. Or a stray dog. It gets all the sketchier when she hands over the requested bag of meds and Aiden has a bizarre, muted reaction to it. Is it too much to hope for that something actually interesting is about to happen? And from Aiden, no less. A man who at this point in his life probably bleeds beige. But because Carrie hasn't read the room once in her whole life, she completely breezes past the strangeness of the whole situation. So giddy is she to have gotten her way, albeit hidden in a converted barn like a 15th century mistress. Ooh, there's the plot for that crappy novel. I'll await my check. This week in Who Gives a Shit news, Anthony stages a soft opening of his Hot Fellas bakery store, where, I'm convinced, he receives a governmental subsidy for hiring well-endowed farmhands who have been kicked in the head by horses. And the horse he has at home, tortured poet Giuseppe, refuses to don a denim onesie and lend his whopping wang to the launch efforts. But then he does. Captivating TV. Lisa's documentary series drags ever onward. In a spectacular irony fail for someone producing a show about unsung black women, she hassles editor Grace, her own unsung black woman, to reject a job offer from Steve McQueen. After 8 long years working on this project, Grace should be in line for some sort of humanitarian award. Or the sweet release of death. Seema's business partner Elliot announces that he's selling his half of their firm to Ryan Serhant. Which Seema takes a lot better than I would have, because I'd have been halfway to the ground floor via the nearest window before he'd even crossed the threshold. She eventually decides to invest in herself, which I think means starting her own company, but could equally mean buying an item of clothing that doesn't look like it was just peeled off something that lives in a swamp. Charlotte's first involvement in this episode is actually in Carrie's storyline. She volunteers to score the meds with, might I add, frightening ease, for Kathy Aiden's wife's son and Carrie's rotting albatross, Wyatt. Because what could possibly go wrong, dosing your children with mystery pills from a Ziploc bag provided by a medically unqualified momfluencer? Her main storyline this episode features the regrettable return of her young co-workers from the gallery. She joins them at a series of after-parties so that she too can sell pretentious tat to a bunch of wealthy men with powdery noses. And in doing so, tries to revive the fun Charlotte of her youth again. At which point, I'm obligated to remind you that fun Charlotte does not, I repeat, does not exist. Think back to every drunken night we've seen her have. We all know that girl. We've probably all been that girl. The one speedrunning the drink, cry, vomit cycle and peeing through her underwear behind a trash can at roughly 8 PM. But it's not Charlotte in need of depends in this episode. I'm sorry to report that it's Harry who messes his criminally tight cool dude jeans, since his bladder is unable to withstand so many ludicrous, ever-deepening levels of After Party that I'm shocked this episode didn't turn out to be a backdoor pilot for an Inception TV show. I'll give them credit for at least featuring an older man having a leaky little oopsie-daisy, and I am entertained by the idea that, since we discovered last season that Harry's little swimmers have been vacationing in his bladder, there's a decent chance he's unknowingly p***ing and j***ing his pants at the same time. But come on, and just like that. Charlotte's storyline here is an already tired rehash of one resolved in Season 2, and Harry is just being used as a punching bag at this point. Do something interesting with them. And not with those f***ing kids either. Anyway, after a quick misunderstanding-based groping by a drug-addled Dutchman in a grotty bathroom, we at least end on a high note. As Charlotte leaves the club in broad daylight, a homeless guy, who I really hope is New York's radio man, passes comment on her
massive da honka bankaloos.
Glorious. Miranda finally asks out BBC producer Joy, but not on a date just yet, for happy hour under the guise of asking for TV interview tips. Because apparently the writers have forgotten that we already saw them having drinks in last season's finale. But we're not expecting high quality writing at this point, are we? Carrie, in the midst of her own multi-layered gameplay with Aiden, unironically quizzes Miranda on whether she needs to employ deception to secure a date by stealth. A question quickly answered on the not date itself. Even if Joy didn't very clearly know what's going on, Miranda, it seems, is incapable of being touched by someone she finds attractive without immediately flooding her basement. All it takes is a palm on the clavicle and her eyes are practically rolled back in her head. Not exactly subtle. And that's it. That's all the Miranda you get this episode. If that leaves you wondering how they managed to wring 40 plus minutes a week out of this, you're not alone. Or for that matter, how they're going to stretch this storyline out over a whole season. I'd say I can't wait to find out, but I could. I definitely could. Welcome back to And Just Like Crap, a review and recap of Sex and the City revival series And Just Like That, in which I try to figure out what we could have possibly done to Michael Patrick King to deserve this. This episode heavily features the youngest Shaw spawn, Wyatt, who I hate with every fibre of my being. So, take a wild guess how this is gonna go. Grab your bags of unused medication and let's get into it. After being metaphorically drop-kicked into Aiden's Virginia guest house under cover of darkness at the end of the last episode, Carrie spends the next day in Virginia trying to get to know the world's worst teenager, Wyatt, better. And boy howdy does she. But before we get to that, I do just want to call out the moment where Carrie rides an ATV to a boutique, notably and unexpectedly without committing vehicular homicide, and roasts its sister wives' style. A bold position, I thought, for someone who veers wildly between fashion icon and looking like someone rolled her through the offcuts from a Project Runway challenge.
Make it work.
Anyway, Wyatt really plays a blinder this episode, even by his own already lofty standards. He's a character devised to elicit not one shred of empathy, and I suppose I have to give the show its flowers for doing such an effective job of making me wish he'd fall under a combine harvester. In a nutshell, Wyatt is revealed to be a significantly bigger dumpster fire than Carrie thought. But what's apparent to us as viewers, though evidently not to Carrie as the one experiencing it firsthand, is why things are as bad as they are. And it's Aiden. Mr. Shaw's stubbornly homebrew treatment plan for a diagnosis of ADHD involves helicopter parenting, restricted screen time, menial labour, and no medication. The effectiveness of which is perfectly demonstrated by Wyatt throwing a fit during family game night, breaking a bunch of windows with a pitchfork, and fleeing into the darkness like Cindy from Scary Movie. Now, I'm not a doctor, but that's a bad sign, right? Aiden's parenting skills aren't entirely non-existent. Middle child Homer, for example, despite being cursed at birth with a name that practically guarantees bullying, is a deliberately written ray of counterbalancing sunshine. Turns out the writers do know how to script tolerable teenagers. But, if you ask me, Aiden is the one messing up his youngest, and in the process, his revived relationship with Carrie. Quite the turnaround from the old Sex and the City days when he was blameless collateral in her maelstrom of emotional immaturity. And it's on that score that the show then decides to do something unprecedented. Carrie addresses her own behaviour and makes a healthy choice in someone else's best interests. See? Whinging on the internet works. Eventually. She acknowledges that Aiden really does need to stay in Virginia to fix his f***ed up family, and that she's been playing games because she didn't believe how bad it was. Like Aiden, I did think we were about to get an overdue third breakup, but alas, instead they agree to go back to their vague 5-year break. Which, hopefully, frees us up for a decent alternative to come her way in the following episodes. She's gonna end up with Aiden eventually, of course, but I want to see Adam the landscaper with his shirt off, and she's the quickest route to it. What? I've got to get some kind of reward for watching this thing, surely. Miranda starts the episode being unexpectedly ambushed in bed by a pussy, which YouTube obligates me to explain to you means an actual cat. Spoil sports. She's still fannying about over BBC producer and prospective girlfriend Joy, which she explains to Carrie while she stress eats what I'm choosing to believe is a giant block of cheese. Joy has invited Ms. Hobbes for another TV interview, which is where And Just Like That manages to drag its first genuine laugh out of me this season. While attempting to put Joy's advice into practice, Miranda chooses an appalling time to pause for breath in the phrase, "the wild countryside," and, not long afterwards, becomes the internet's new favourite meme. Just for the love of numbers, if you count the first time she says it, the all-C word is dropped a total of 23 times in this episode, which automatically makes it my favourite they've ever produced. I'm easily pleased. That might also be a record which is impressive going on a network which once produced Deadwood. Rather than focus on being a global laughingstock or having potentially damaged her newfound career, Miranda's more concerned about whether the whole thing has turned Joy off. So much so that she allows her prospective lover to rock up at Carrie's house with a collection of loud, annoying friends, in possession of a wild mix of real and fake English accents. But then, finding an undeported foreign worker in America these days must be like looking for an unlubricated surface in P. Diddy's house. Ultimately, it turns out that Joy is still interested and they share a first kiss, slightly creepily observed by Carrie on her Ring camera. I'm assuming there's just one at the front door and not, say, in the guest bedroom, because if not, I have grossly underestimated Ms. Bradshaw. And I am very impressed. This week in Who Gives a Shit news, Lisa's talking in her sleep, causing a temporary sleep divorce between she and husband Herbert. Apparently, the stress of choosing a new editor after last week's departure of long-suffering incumbent Grace is the cause. Things are semi-resolved by the arrival of replacement Marion Odin, played by Mehcad Brooks, who I know from watching True Blood in the past and several hopefully vivid fantasies I anticipate in the near future. Seema is kicked out of her office and firm by unwelcome new partner and narrative carbuncle Ryan Serhant, who continues to unconvincingly play himself. He might approach tolerable if he put half as much effort into not being this episode's true wild c***. Ms. Patel ends up retreating, setting up what I assume is going to be some form of unsatisfying revenge by season's end. I'll be right here waiting, on the edge of my seat. We discover that Miranda's wildest and most inappropriate fears from last season have come true, when we briefly check back in with son Brady, who we find slicing potatoes in a service industry job during his indefinite and possibly infinite gap year before college, and standing in front of a weekly schedule which, if he's the author, I'd like to impolitely decline. Last time, I begged the show to do something interesting with Charlotte and Harry, and to stop using Harry as a punching bag. Well, it turns out they can only respond to one plea sent out into the universe at a time, and Carrie already used up my credit. Their entire plot this episode revolves around them using Building Link to communicate with the other people in their apartment block. Or at least it starts that way. but it is very quickly revealed to be a wafer-thin vehicle for more of what we've been getting for 3 seasons now. Firstly, Rock is the main advocate of the app due to its promotion of a sense of community. For there is apparently no cause on earth they won't become an activist for and in the process instantly turn me against. F*** community. Let's all live in caves. Secondly, they're enduring a visit from Harry's father Morris, played by the great and very recently departed Harris Yulin. And I'm showing both my age and my geekiness by saying I spent the whole episode hoping he'd reveal himself to be on official business for the Watchers Council. No such luck. Harry, perhaps because he pissed his britches last episode, abruptly begins feeling the icy grip of death on both his shoulder and later, his knob. In a further humiliation, he fails to perform in bed with Charlotte and worries that his body is failing him. Harry has reason to be optimistic though, because it transpires that Morris still has some lead in the old pencil. Not only does Rock discover that he's been hammering Pornhub on his iPad, in a surprisingly small font size, but they reveal that he's spending the night upstairs hammering one of their elderly neighbours too. After what I assume would be a solid half hour of mutually digging through skin folds like they're trying to find the back of an obese elephant's knee. Oh, and Lily casually drops into dinner-time conversation that she's in a poly relationship with new boyfriend Diego, who also has a boyfriend. 50-50 whether that's a throwaway thing or going to cause serious problems down the road. Fingers crossed! Hell's bells, it's the Krusty Fox! Back with yet another review and recap of Sex and the City revival series, and just like that. It's a very mixed bag this time around, ranging from the pathologically selfish to the genuinely upsetting. Like most of my first dates. So grab the tissues for a variety of reasons, and let's get into it. Carrie's major beef this episode is with downstairs neighbour Duncan Reeves, who takes exception to her objectively ridiculous penchant for wearing heels at all times. In a house full of hardwood floors, with a congenital hip condition, in her 50s. I'm surprised she's not dragging herself from room to room like a dog with an itchy bumhole. The problem with Carrie's problem here is that, as usual, she's the problem. We're shown right at the outset that she's stomping about like an extra from Jurassic Park, and in what I have to assume is completely over-the-top couture.
Well, look who's ready for a night at home!
Her wildly passive-aggressive attitude doesn't help much either, extending olive branches to Duncan only so that she can take further snide potshots at him. And evidently finding herself endlessly entertaining in the process, despite the fact that most people outside of her social circle react to her like she might have escaped from a nearby psychiatric facility. Duncan is a writer of historical biographies, apparently of some renown. Perhaps his career was, like his dress sense, influenced by Indiana Jones. He appears in the apartment below Carrie for a 6-month stint just as she's taking her first tentative steps into historical fiction. Gee whiz, I wonder what's going to happen. We do, at least, get our first off-screen Samantha Jones appearance this season when she provides Carrie with some London-sourced intel on Duncan. Are they sowing the seeds for another on-screen cameo? I can't imagine HBO haven't at least asked. Please, Kim. Your people need you. Also, was that a fourth wall break when Carrie mentions The Devil Wears Prada? It sure looked like one. Has she remained aware of us ever since her early SATC pieces to camera? Can she see me now? Quick, how many fingers am I holding up?
1.
F***. Anyway, after saving Duncan from a boiling pot, they declare a truce over dinner, conveniently setting up his inevitable intervention in her horrific novel. He also reveals that he's writing a biography of Margaret Thatcher. You might not be aware that I've written one too, from the perspective of one of the Northerners whose local economy she destroyed. And here it is. She was a f***ing Remember last time when I complained that Harry was being used as the show's punching bag? And the time before that, when I begged them to do something interesting with he and Charlotte? Well, he's got prostate cancer. F***'s sake. Turns out that's been the source of his recent downstairs dysfunctions, and similarly to those, he asks that Charlotte keep his diagnosis a secret from everyone else. Harry's very sure that he's going to be fine and that it's no big deal. But I'll be honest, narratively speaking, it's not looking great for him. What you might not know is that actor Evan Handler is himself a cancer survivor after twice beating acute myeloid leukemia some 40 years ago. And given this show's usual approach to sensitive topics, I have to assume that he's the reason why there's some genuine, if limited, pathos injected into this storyline. In the run-up to a glamping trip with the Todd Wexleys, Charlotte's evidently not doing great. She channels her worry into a farcical attempt to forge new family memories. Though frankly, I'd sooner suffer a traumatic brain injury than retain any recollection of those kids. After failing to covertly Norman Rockwell her uninterested clan, Charlotte buggers off to the pool with Lisa. And it's this scene that makes me think that Harry might be on the chopping block. The writing of this show is about as subtle as a sledgehammer, and Charlotte's genuinely upsetting silence, along with the foreboding background music, makes me think they might actually go there. Harry's the last undestroyed husband from the Sex and the City days, so it would certainly be on trend. So, in summary, be careful what you wish for. When I said I wanted something interesting, I meant like Lily only getting into Florida Memorial University or Rock being revealed as the murderer of all of Park Avenue's cats. You know, fun stuff. This week in Who Gives a Shit news, Lisa has an entirely predictable work crush on new chief editor of her never-ending documentary series, Marion. Husband Herbert has a correspondingly foreseeable issue with it when he discovers a selfie of the pair on Lisa's phone. I'm with Lisa, though. I'd climb him like Lara Croft. There's strong evidence that college admissions tutor Lois Fingerhood might have had a point about the Todd Wexley family's out-of-touch excesses. When middle child Henry labels a croque monsieur divine during their glamping trip, you can practically see Herbert making a mental note to keep him the hell away from any of his campaign activities. Love's young dipshit Lily worries that she's getting a raw deal compared to polyamorous boyfriend Diego's boyfriend. Although, ironically, Diego's boyfriend probably spends much of his time hoping that he'll get a raw deal. If you know what I mean. Seema tries and fails to secure funding for her own real estate business. Though that's not entirely shocking, considering that her loan application appears to be based solely on the idea that men are shit. And if that was any basis for financial support, I'd be a millionaire by now. On a related note, I do just want to highlight Carrie's reaction here, complaining that she was once turned down for an apartment loan. Turns out that when Carrie's the one with the bursting bank account, she's a lot less into the idea of friends helping friends financially. What a tosser. And Aiden turns out to be the off-screen purchaser of that f***ing awful dining table that Carrie wanted. Which, if I'm reading this correctly, has somehow gone from the $6,750 list price to over $20,000 with postage and taxes. Is there anyone left who finds this stuff relatable? Do let me know. To misquote Mark Twain, there are no new ideas. And because of that, Miranda is also experiencing neighbour trouble this episode. Although, with that being said, hers is far more entertaining than anyone else's so far. She passes a series of notes under the door of her Airbnb neighbour, who's blasting music while she tries to work. It's when she delivers what turns out to be her final note that her storyline again gets a genuine laugh out of me. because it results in what appears to be Gandalf on meth bursting out of his front door stark bollock naked, brandishing a meat cleaver and making death threats. Now that's the New York I like. Ms. Hobbes winds up moving in with Carrie, which must have ranked only slightly above being served as the appetizer at a serial killer brunch. Miranda spends precisely 42 seconds in the house before Ms. Bradshaw accuses her of being too loud and not knowing how to walk in heels. Best friends, everyone. In fairness, Carrie may be the bigger nightmare roommate, but Miranda gives it the old college try too, when she wanders the hallways in nothing but socks. Did we need to know that she still has a largely untamed bush? Don't answer that, because we did not. Fair play to Cynthia Nixon though, she's the only remaining cast member willing to flop her bits out once or twice a season. Miranda's further housemate crimes include eating yogurt and banana, drinking Mexican Coke, not treating a table as an ornament, leaving open containers where Carrie can blunder into them, and, less understandably, using designer clothing to mop up spills. Although, personally, I'd have burned that scarf. It's funny that Carrie is such an asshole about all of this because it proves that living for over a decade with Big did nothing to curb the self-involved spiral she descends into the second she has to share living space. Imagine what she'll be like when Aidan brings the farmyard with him in 5 years, and the padded cell for Wyatt's visits. Ultimately, Seema agrees to help Miranda find a 2-bedroom place of her own. Presumably, the second bedroom is for Brady to occasionally stay, and the rest of the time will be where she stands with her baps out in front of open windows at 2 a.m. Welcome back to the Krusty Fox for another episode of And Just Like Crap, a bad-tempered recap and review of Sex and the City revival series And Just Like That. We've reached the halfway point of this season, and you know what that means. It's time for a death to boost ratings! So don your most tastefully mournful outfit, and let's get into it.
Ow! What are you, nuts?
This week, Lisa makes it out of Nobody Cares News. Unfortunately, it's because the show has decided to fix last season's f***up and re-kill her father. The Lord giveth, etc., etc. In the lead-up, Lisa's back working on the never-ending story, aka her documentary, with new editor Marion, a man who has the brass balls to unironically make fun of the name of Herbert's campaign manager, Chauncey. Lisa naturally allows this to slide by because she's hoping that Marion slides something else her way. To that end, she puts her phone on silent to better concentrate on his dulcet tones, but only succeeds in very clearly hearing him declare that he's married. She kicks herself in the tits. The other unintended result of her actions is that she fails to notice a slew of phone calls coming through to inform her that her father Lawrence, previously played by Billy D. Williams, is Billy D. E.A.D., and so doesn't make it to the hospital in time to say goodbye. Lisa struggles to deal with her guilt, though encounters a welcome distraction when Lucille, the general manager of Lawrence's Newark Free Theatre, somehow gets it into her head that she's the right person to organise the funeral. Over some delicious-looking chicken and waffles, Lucille ultimately gets her way, though promises a tasteful approach, and whips a bottle of hot sauce out of her Michael Kors handbag that looks like it'll give her an hole like a dragon's nostril. The event ends up as a sublimely ridiculous on-stage memorial extravaganza, complete with Lucille's own song and dance number. Well, when you've got Jennifer Lewis, you might as well. Bye, Lawrence. Sorry you had to die twice. We rejoin Carrie as she heads downstairs to slurp on neighbour Duncan's mutton stew, which I promise you is not what it sounds like. And what a good job it is that he enjoys some tough old meat, because these two are definitely f***ing by season's end. As for why, well, that requires a bit more explanation. Side note, Carrie spends much of this episode hammering Tums for indigestion, supposedly as a result of the leathery stew. A commentary on her growing unease in her relationship? Or another plot thread like her memory issues that will be ironically forgotten by next week? You decide. Anyway, after admirably managing to gaslight, now that's what I call a mistake 2010 headliner and son, Wyatt, into signing up for a week-long wilderness retreat, Aidan comes to visit. He's out of his cab less than 30 seconds before he causes an issue when his attempt at a rubbish romantic gesture puts one of Carrie's windows through. He launches from there into a manic and ultimately fruitless quest to find period-accurate replacement French doors in Pennsylvania. Why the mania? Ooh boy. Turns out, Aidan's been a naughty boy. When Wyatt, predictably, reverted to type at the airport and refused to board his plane, an argument ensued which ultimately led to Aidan shagging his ex, Kathy Aidan's wife. It probably doesn't feature in any divorced parenting manuals, but for the record, that usually cheers me up. And strap in everyone, because it's with that revelation that the show decides to retroactively paper over Carrie's past mistakes again. Her reaction is unbelievably cool, because remember, she had a whole ass affair the first time they were together. She basically decides, for convenience's sake, that actually she never agreed not to sleep with other people during their 5-year break, and that it's on both of them for not agreeing terms in advance. Now, I'm not saying any of that's wrong, necessarily, but even with 20 years of character development, this is not Carrie Bradshaw. And in any event, having identified the problem, they still don't discuss it. Carrie implies that she doesn't want an open relationship, or whatever they'd call this mess, but it's left just as vague and messy, which, to be fair, is a lot more like Carrie. So, all I'm left to assume is that she's got one eye on Aidan and the other peeking through a hole in the floorboards while Duncan changes into whatever stereotypical tweed ensemble he's got laid out for the day. Maybe she's intrigued to see what his mutton dagger can do when it's not popping a semi over Google image searches for Maggie Thatcher. This week in Who Gives a Shit news, Bitsy Von Muffling makes a welcome reappearance, though largely in service of her discovering that she's no longer on New York's A-list for events. In fairness, I too would be Von Miffed if I discovered that shut-in Charlotte was getting invited places that I wasn't. Breakup addict Seema has to dump driver Rocco, now that she's experiencing a personal level of poverty that would still fund the military of a small island nation. I'm just gonna say it. This would never happen to Samantha Jones. Anthony's Hot Fellas bakery storefront appears to be going well, particularly with boyfriend Giuseppe and his 12-inch pain train front and centre. And other than a wry joke or two, that's his entire contribution. His Stanfordization is complete. Herbert's mother Eunice pops back up for the funeral scenes, offering an excellent Liberace joke. I'd have her back every episode if I had my way. She's the only character who seems to be aware of how ridiculous everything around her is. And Carrie agrees to do a first chapter swap with Duncan from their respective acts of literary manslaughter. And for very different reasons, I imagine they're both going to struggle to make it even that far into each other's endeavours. After fleeing her Airbnb under threat of death and Carrie's apartment under threat of nag, Miranda has been staying with new girlfriend Joy, though she recognises the need to get her own place soon to avoid becoming a lesbian cliché. I think that ship might have already sailed. Luckily, Seema has found her an apparently perfect apartment, though it has one regrettable catch. The owners want $150,000 over asking. Miranda objects to this on principle, which is both understandable and woefully naive. Manhattan property prices are objectively insane, but if you're gonna choose to be there, then you're gonna have to do some things that you're not comfortable with. Like a sleepover at Jared Leto's house. She does eventually buy the place, but for similarly naive reasons. The only other viable alternative is a condo that doesn't allow pets, which wouldn't jive with Joy's relatably judgmental Italian greyhounds. Buying real estate on the basis of a weeks-old relationship. Yup, no danger of becoming a lesbian cliché here. Speaking of Joy, Miranda seems to take her name as a challenge by introducing her to Wet Blanket's son, Brady. Joy betrays those of us in the kids are the worst camp by letting Hobbes Jr.'s animal-loving ways win her over. Little does she know that one positive trait is merely the deceptive cherry on top of a shit trifle. Things seem to be going well for old Miss Hobbes, which means it's only a matter of time before Steve reappears. Synchronize your watches! Charlotte is trying her level best, which isn't saying much admittedly, to keep Harry's cancer diagnosis a secret.
This is life, and we have got to be here for every moment.
Okay.
Mr. Goldenblatt decides to go for the surgical option after being told by his doctor that there's a 98% chance of curing him, though at this point he's facing a choice between erectile dysfunction and incontinence, which would come as a relief considering up to now the show decided for him that he might enjoy having both. Charlotte spirals very quickly after the news about Lisa's father breaks, which Harry tries and fails to curb with inconvenient methods such as logic and reason. The dam finally breaks when Carrie catches her browsing Walgreens for adult male depends, which is disappointing because I was looking forward to seeing what kind of lie she'd spin to get out of that one. And while we're talking about it, that looks like a reasonably small store and they have an entire aisle dedicated to incontinence aids. Is New York okay? I'd like to visit again someday, and I need to know whether I'll take a cab from JFK or just ride a log flume on a river of accidental piss all the way to Manhattan. Joking aside, this is giving Kristen Davis some good material for the first time in 3 seasons, and they're obviously going somewhere with Harry's mostly blasé approach to his illness. So, I can't complain. Yet. Don't worry, I'll find something. Well, twist my unmentionables right off. It's the Krusty Fox. I'm back for another episode of And Just Like Crap, a shady little recap of Sex and the City revival series And Just Like That. It's party time in New York this week, which means some delicious mess. So, roll around in some sequins, rugby tackle anyone who goes near the karaoke machine, and let's get into it. We are being fully gaslighted about Carrie's minging debut novel. After their first chapter swap, I'd personally have interpreted neighbour Duncan's praise, which includes such words as brilliant, propulsive, and grounded, as heavily sarcastic cruelty. But they aren't. He means it. Because, of course, Carrie has revolutionized fiction. We're expected to believe that her opening line,
The woman wondered what she'd gotten herself into,
stopped a world-renowned author dead in his tracks, awestruck by its genius. The only thing striking me after reading that first chapter would be the train I'd stepped in front of. As has long been the case, nothing tickles Carrie's fancy like smoke being blown up her proverbial, which, I suspect, Duncan is very aware of. And so he receives an invite to a party in Charlotte's honour. But don't worry, we'll get to that. From the minute he shows up, she's glued to him like she struck gold while rooting around in his garbage for bank statements and letters from his cardiologist. They share drinks. They slink off to the terrace together. They laugh and joke and flirt, all of which catches Miranda's attention. Miss Hobbes' fatal mistake is the same one we've seen her make before, attempting to have an adult conversation with her best friend of 30 years. When she passes comment on the strikingly obvious vibe between Carrie and Duncan, Carrie's reaction is 0 to 60 in 2 seconds on the psycho scale. As per usual, everything Miranda says is 100% accurate. That Carrie's relationship with Aiden is hard work, that she doesn't seem to be having any fun lately, that there may be better options available. Carrie, meanwhile, is mortally offended at the mere suggestion that she might be unfaithful. An ancient memo evidently dropped into the spam folder of both her mouth and clampot.
You've got mail.
And Carrie knows all of this, like she always does. She knows that her relationship is a pile of whack, sometimes literally, but she just can't admit that she's wrong. And so, the woman chooses to continue living in thinly veiled denial. 3 episodes, max, before she's chowing down on some certified British beef. Mark my words. Charlotte's literally cancerous storyline trundles along this week, with the pressure of keeping Harry's prostate cancer secret reaching boiling point. The excuse for the aforementioned party is Charlotte's carefully unspecified birthday, though we're pointedly reminded several times that it's not her 60th. That'll be that positive spin on the aging process we were promised, I suppose. The real reason is that Carrie wants to cheer Charlotte up and distract her from her troubles. Admirable goals! Immediately shot to shit by Carrie making it painfully obvious to Miranda that something else is up. And rather than engage all that fiction writing imagination to invent a cover story, telling her that Richard Burton has an inoperable tumour. Which, in fairness, does lead to one of the episode's best jokes when multiple people, including Harry, blithely acknowledge that her dog dying would probably mess her up more than her husband. Fair enough. Events are then set on an escalating scale of silliness, starting with Harry's admission that he's confided in his personal shopper at Bergdorf's about his illness. Another highly relatable experience for all of us watching at home. I'm more in the trailed around the place by a store detective income bracket. Things come to a head when Miranda, in the episode's other best joke, accidentally implies that Charlotte could just nip down to the stray husband shelter to get a replacement if he pops his clogs. That's when he gathers most of the main players up, though evidently Anthony and Seema don't get a look in, and lets the cat out of the bag. His surgery's next week, so expect a less funny take on the whole thing. From the show, at least. For my part, I've got enough bum jokes lined up to fill a 90s Nickelodeon show. So, if you're in the market for that, why not like and subscribe? I'm only gonna get worse from here, and you wouldn't want to miss that, would you? This week in Who Gives a Shit news, Lily's boyfriend Diego ballet dances right out of their newborn poly relationship, providing her with the perfect excuse to slope around the episode, draping herself over furniture and at no point wondering if this might be the reason she's single. And sometime lay Brady, who's also at the party, doesn't even cross her mind as a rebound option. Ouch. Giuseppe's therapist mother, Gia, played by the always welcome Patti LuPone, visits from Rome in this episode, and she does not care for sexagenarian son-in-law Anthony, though she does take a liking to Carrie, perhaps sensing a money-making opportunity in her bottomless pit of unresolved issues. We get a more literal example of nobody caring when Anthony advises Carrie that, should Gia ask, he was never married. Carrie's response?
Okay, neither was I.
She's never beating those manslaughter allegations. Henry Todd Wexley's teenage humiliation tour continues unabated. He hogs the karaoke for much of the party, with a set that jackknifes wildly between I Dreamed a Dream and Copacabana. The kid couldn't be getting gay-coded any harder if they had him dress all in rainbows and use VHS cleaner as cologne. Miranda's main role in the episode is to be the unofficial party MC, desperately trying with all her might to bring the atmosphere up. It's worth saying I very much like the version of her we're getting in the post-Che era. Well-intentioned, funny, and only ever one bad day away from a full nervous breakdown. Works for me! Charlotte's colleagues from the gallery manage a cheeky throwback to Sex and the City's Season 1 baby shower episode, as they fight over whose names are going on a crappy regifted candle. Leela, the blonde one, FYI, also belts out a great cover of River Deep Mountain High. See? Even the worst written characters can occasionally prove worthwhile when deployed correctly. And the only reliably deployed guest character, Bitsy Von Muffling, pops up at the party to immediately hit on the nearest gay man and force him to duet Shallow with her. I want a Bitsy spin-off yesterday. Just her, a platinum card, and a new lavender marriage every episode. Bliss. This week, it's Seema's turn to make it out of Nobody Cares news. Her version of poverty, while still as relatable as Father's Day in an orphanage, at least provides some laughs this time. Her slightly limited means drive her to a down-market local salon to get lash extensions, where a technician, with claws like a gay werewolf, attempts to communicate across the language barrier between English and English with a mouthful of balls.
How much put your pad on your face, okay?
By the time the party rolls around, said claws have given Ms. Patel a raging case of pink eye, and I presume it was vanity that stopped the show going fully gross in its presentation. Where's the swelling? The oozing pus? The simmering disgust of fellow partygoers who assume she's been scratching her arse and not washing her hands afterwards? It's not relatable. Her solution to this infectious problem is to MacGyver an eye patch out of a Louis Vuitton fanny pack, which I'll give the show credit for on the basis of finally letting a character not take themselves so seriously. Next, let's see Carrie show up at brunch with a stole that looks suspiciously like shoe. Things half look up for Seema though, when landscaper Adam reveals he's single and drunkenly serenades her on the karaoke machine of shame. And it is wildly good timing that they chose Betty Davis eyes for the same week that Jojo Siwa's Gargling Rocks at the Chemical Plant cover version was teased. Logan Marshall Green, for what it's worth, is a surprisingly good singer, and his gently teasing rendition halts Seema's planned Irish exit and instead sends them home together. And fair play, because that would work on me too. They'd need to put an inflatable paddling pool under me by the end of the first verse. Well, twizzle my trouser flute. It's the Krusty Fox with a brand new episode of And Just Like Crap, a snarky little recap and review of Sex and the City revival series And Just Like That. Things get ever messier this week, in some ways literally. So break out your most absorbent mop and let's get into it. I cannot begin to tell you how done I am with this rubbish third relationship of Carrie and Aiden's. He rocks up for a longer visit to NYC at the beginning of this episode, which Carrie describes as a nice surprise. I might describe it a bit differently. For example, an inconvenience, a blight, f***ing awful. Because it's all their relationship really is these days, there's a callback to their last attempt to live together back in Sex and the City, when Aiden jokingly disrespects the obsessive feng shui of Carrie's closet space. All of his old shit ends up relegated to a spare closet in the cat's room, which, if nothing else, makes it easier for him to gather it all up and get the f*** out. There is a nasty little vibe running through this episode when it comes to Aiden's behaviour. Lest we forget, like Carrie has chosen to, he announced 2 weeks ago that he'd cheated with his ex, Kathy Aiden's wife. And in the same episode, he very visibly clocked downstairs neighbour Duncan in what I, stupid optimist that I am, assumed might be him approving of Carrie getting a little extracurricular something going on too. But no, that's absolutely not Aiden's deal. When Carrie attempts to head to a pre-arranged writing session with Duncan, Aiden chooses that moment to conveniently trauma dump a load of old shit about terrible, awful, no good, very bad son, Wyatt. It's framed as poor timing, but I dunno. There's an air of coercion about it that I am not a big fan of. And that is coming from someone who thinks Carrie is the kind of manipulator that would win Squid Game in 2 rounds or less. Obviously, Aiden is feeling insecure, and it's either that or an off-screen stroke that causes him to refer to Duncan as that cat. And that insecurity is not for nothing. I mean, let's weigh it up, shall we? The dipshit you've tried and failed with twice before, with the horrendous family and the wandering Willie, or the intelligent, handsome, successful writer who lives below you. What will Carrie do, I wonder? Harry's had his surgery, and as you, like I, will have come to accept by now, the seriousness of his situation rockets by at Mach 3 so that there's more time for comments about his swollen coin purse. Charlotte doesn't have time to stare at her husband's engorged knackers though. She's busy at the gallery, staging a ropey recreation of Tracy Emin's 1998 My Bed installation. And given that the gallery staff think it was a product of the 80s, we can assume that the show's writers didn't do any more research than they did. Charlotte also muses that the artwork in question was from a time before Lena Dunham, when it was less acceptable for women to be, and I'm paraphrasing here, disgusting, slimy filth monsters. And if you disagree with that description, I would strongly advise you to read Dunham's autobiography. Yikes. The entire exhibit is wanky, arty-farty bullshit of the highest order. My favourite part of which is its title, Happily Ever After, prominently displayed in front of a wall-to-ceiling display proclaiming, "Right now, I'm not happy." Maybe because one of the guests turned up wearing a Lego man's penis as a hat. In the process of stopping Miranda from doing something supremely fucking stupid, which we'll get to soon, Charlotte's badly timed vertigo relapse causes her to collapse onto the gross bed and the love glove full of hand lotion strategically draped across it. Dignified, worthwhile stuff. As expected. And if you'd like to drop a like and strategically drape yourself across the subscribe button, I'd appreciate it. This week in Who Gives a Shit news, Harry's impression of his oncologist makes him sound suspiciously like My £600 Life's Doctor Now, which I'm only just realising is precisely the kind of cameo I've been longing for. This show badly needs that level of objective, borderline abusive tough love. Get him booked, guys! Cruel genetic prank Wyatt Shaw decides he wants to go live with his mother, Kathy Aiden's wife, which leads Aiden to wonder what he could have done to cause it. Off the top of my head, Aiden? Refuse to medicate him, force him to paint stuff needlessly, constantly restrict his movements, and inflict Carrie on him. Just a few thoughts. Despite his bedroom prowess temporarily changing her name to Screamer, Seema discovers that landscaper Adam does have flaws. He uses crystals instead of deodorant, and his last name is Karma. But he does wear slutty little glasses, so, you know. We also see Adam out of work clothes for the first time in more ways than one, and to say I'm a fan would be something of an understatement. I like this for Seema. More please. Carrie's shit novel, which is probably going to end up being called something like The Darling Buds of Me, continues its grim path toward the light. If you'd like a check-in with how it's going, listen to this.
The woman felt happiness had arrived at her doorstep, remarkably and quite unexpected, like a magnificent red bird which suddenly appears in the garden.
It's like someone gave ChatGPT a lobotomy and asked it to rewrite 50 Shades of Grey for young adults. Lisa's fashion choices continue to defy logic, taste, and reason. This week, she sports what appears to be a get-up rejected by the costume department of The Greatest Showman for being too harsh on the eye. And the circus theme feels very deliberate because she's also wearing a giant gold elephant brooch. This is meant to be a rich, stylish woman, guys. Why is she dressed like a sofa that gained sentience and escaped the set of Happy Days? Anyway, Mrs. Todd Wexley's flirtation with editor Marion reaches new heights this week, as she begins having sexy dreams about him, wherein he works on a farm she owns. There's an imagery problem there, which I have no desire to unpack any further. Charlotte reassures her that she has similar dreams about her exes. If she wants them to last all night, let's hope they're not about Trey. In a fairly transparent effort to distract herself from this, Lisa tries to have a go on husband Herbert early one morning, which he not so much ruins as drives a mid-range family SUV through with coffee, piss, and grocery talk, otherwise known as the Horny Trinity. Marion compounds the problem by teaming the sluttiest eating of a papaya I've ever seen with some heavy double entendre, plus an invite to a film screening where he and Lisa, shock horror, touch knees. We're going to have to convene a meeting of the church elders to discuss this disgraceful debauchery. Regardless of how overblown all of this is, Lisa makes a swift exit, but does, courtesy of Marion, finally make a connection which may lead to Michelle Obama appearing in the documentary that Deadlines forgot. Albeit by phone and at a distance I presume Marion's ankle spanker can't reach. Anyway, don't mind me, I'm just gonna look at this for a while. Miranda's, I'm just gonna say it, f***ing ridiculous storyline this time around all centers on a rogue bottle of Canadian gin. Girlfriend Joy, who isn't aware that Miss Hobbes is an alcoholic, only that she doesn't drink, brings it by on the way back from a trip up north. Joy says she's never left alcohol at a partner's place before, which Miranda jumps on, ironically enough, like a woman dying of thirst being offered a damp sponge. And so she allows the bottle of danger juice to lurk in one of her cupboards. I'll say it again because it bears repeating. The Miranda of old was nowhere near this needy, reading everything into nothing. If they'd maybe contextualized this at some point with a neurosis about ending up alone in an ever-dwindling dating pool or something, it might read better. As it is, it's just weirdly desperate behavior. Miranda discloses this development to Carrie and Charlotte at the gallery opening, along with the suggestion that, rather than alcoholic, she might be alcohol-ish. After Charlotte literally crashes her attempt to sneak a sip of Joy's champagne, Miranda finds herself at home, staring down the bottle of gin, a drink she's already stated she hates. Drinking for the sake of drinking. Definitely not alcohol-ish. And while edging a relapse is by no means an uncommon occurrence for addicts, no groundwork has been laid for this. Miranda's been in bars, knocking back mocktails, and not had so much as a wobble. So I don't buy this being the thing that brings her to the cliff edge. Anyway, she eventually wangs the offending gin into the trash. Just FYI. It's fine to just say no to looking after things for your loved ones. Then there's no risk of you tipping it down a garbage chute. And that's why I'm not allowed to babysit anymore. Well, bumfuzzle my beanpole and call me Bertram. It's the Krusty Fox, back once more for another episode of And Just Like Crap, a cranky little review and recap of Sex and the City revival series And Just Like That. This week we are reheating the year 2001's nachos, so pop some plastic sheets over any soft furnishings, just in case, and let's get into it. Consider me truly surprised for a change because they actually went there. Carrie and Aidan broke up for a record third time. Surprise! But first, let's take a moment to appreciate how chronically incapable Carrie is of not living her life as literally as possible. She's writing a novel set in the 1800s, so what does she do? Starts dressing like she's on her way to the nearest Ren fair. I also want to say up top a huge well done to the writers of the last couple of seasons for taking Aidan Shaw from the only decent man Carrie ever dated to arguably one of the worst. It's not good, per se, but it is impressive. Like doing a high kick but breaking your own nose. Aidan spends this episode, like he spent the last, very much back on his early 2000s bullshit. And by that, I mean stalking around Carrie's life, sniffing suspiciously at any man who comes within 10 feet of her, all the while threatening to cock his leg and release a jet stream of territorial wang water. But we'll get to the specifics of what Aidan actually does in a bit. You should be aware that this episode caused me deep discomfort because it made me violently team Carrie, as it was designed to. Starting with, we're later led to believe, Aidan basically stalking basement-dwelling neighbour Duncan to, I dunno, scope him out? Warn him off? Hit the show's hypocrite high score? Unclear. Duncan, for what it's worth, seems entirely unbothered by all of this. You could read that as stereotypical English stoicism. But if I were a renowned writer, I don't imagine I would feel particularly threatened by the judgment of the hillbilly carpenter with his Fruit of the Loom t-shirt and stupid f***ing questions. Carrie's approach to the issue is not to approach it, partially because she knows full well the conversation it will lead to, and partially because, as mentioned up top, we're basically redoing Sex and the City Season 4 with some flimsy garnish sprinkled around it. In other words, Carrie's allowing Aidan to act out. Why? Because, on some level, she still feels like he's entitled to, due to the historical crimes committed by her Whisker Biscuit. Everything comes to a head at a fateful lunch-based showdown where Aidan admits that he still has trust issues with Carrie, and she admits that she's given all she has to give to their relationship. And if it isn't enough, he can, and I'm paraphrasing, f*** right off. Which he does. Exit stage right, Aidan Shaw. And with that, we are finally free of the only legacy boyfriend I can think of that they'd seriously try to reintroduce for Carrie. And the landing strip is now, perhaps literally, clear for Duncan to land. Unless, of course, they decide to set the internet on fire and bring Burger back. It would do great things for the ratings, and terrible things for my cardiovascular health. This week in Who Gives a Shit news? Everybody else, given how much time is devoted to Carrie and Aidan's conflama. Seema finally gives in and tries Adam's armpit crystals instead of her regular deodorant, which leads to a sweaty meeting with a potential client, at which she becomes the woman from the last episode she judged for publicly masking her musk. Ask yourself this: would you rather see somebody's underarms for 5 seconds or smell their trench stench for 5 hours? Exactly. Remember Carrie's Tavern Wench cosplay? Well, it turns out that Duncan also picks up habits from his works in progress. In this case, smoking a pipe, because half of Thatcher's cabinet did. And given what we know about the top secret deviancy of many politicians, let's hope he drew the line there. Andy Cohen reprises his Sex and the City Season 6 role as a shoe department assistant, whose name, we finally learn, is David. It would have been funnier just to call him Andy, right? Like he goes straight from a shift at Macy's to watch what happens live. Our one scene with Charlotte and Harry this week can be summarised thus. He's no longer peeing through a tube, and she can't stop falling over. I did like that on Harry's nightstand there's a copy of Carrie's Loved and Lost book. Maybe he's checking to see how many times she mined his private life for content, with all the sinister glee of a family YouTuber with a chronically ill child. Herbert's on a diet, which is not going well. In line with this show's usual approach to body positivity, expect him to be walking nude through the background next episode, crying with a nutty buddy hanging out of his mouth, and the word pig scrawled across his stomach in Cheese Whiz. Miranda finally admits to girlfriend Joy that she's an alcoholic, and had to send her bottle of gin to the Upside Down to avoid a relapse. It does look for a second like Joy's about to whip off her mask and reveal a huge asshole underneath, but thankfully it ends up being a sweet moment of vulnerability between the two. Expect it not to last. And Anthony has a very enjoyable ageist showdown with mother-in-law Gia, full of phony Italian accents and table-sweeping outbursts. On her way out, Gia tells son Giuseppe that she's cutting him off, which at least explains how a guy peddling poems for $1 at Barnes & Noble survived more than a week in Manhattan without having to sell his belongings, organs, and ass. I do think it's worth taking inventory of how many times in this episode alone, and just like that hammers a nail into the coffin of Carrie and Aiden's relationship. It's a comprehensive piece of work. I would say it should be studied, but the education system of most countries is bad enough already without adding this to it. First, there's the shitty little inquiry about Duncan's pipe. Not what it sounds like. But frankly, given how hard the writers went on Aiden's awfulness, I'm kind of surprised he didn't just flop his hog out onto the patio furniture and challenge him to a duel. Asking why someone smokes a pipe isn't the issue here. It's the weirdly aggressive tone and his refusal to acknowledge the fact that Carrie's gurning from embarrassment so much that she's about to swallow her own chin. There's also his attempt to get Carrie to back him up on the fact that having kids with his ex, Kathy Aiden's wife, was the best thing they ever did together. I mean, considering the most recent thing they did together was I'd say that does force his rancid brood somewhat further up the list, but we'll come back to that. Then there's the fact that he's in close enough proximity to interrogate Duncan in the first place. Carrie set a boundary, finally proving that she at least knows what one is, and Aiden drove his truck right through it, licking his hand all the while. Next, there's his cringeworthy intrusion on one of Carrie and Duncan's writing sessions to pathetically insist on cooking them steaks. Now, I get this behaviour. I have been on both sides of this behaviour. But I can tell you from experience that, if healthy communication isn't fixing your relationship, peppercorn sauce probably isn't going to do it either. Coming in hot is another case of the show going Sex and the City redux, when Aiden bluntly tells Carrie to go and have a shower because she smells of Duncan's pipe. Again, very much not what it sounds like. Aside from this being bad form generally though, is Aiden for real? He lives on a farm with 2 teenage boys. Any environment that doesn't stink of chicken shit, BO, and the faint but unmistakable bouquet of cum should be like a snout full of fresh laundry to him. Then of course we come to the hypocritical core of the thing. Aiden's accidental admission that he still doesn't trust Carrie around other men. How are you gonna sit there, smugly spouting off about not trusting a partner you literally just cheated on? Try some introspection, my dude. Or jamming your strumpet thumper into a meat grinder. Either works for me. And I think at this point we're forced to acknowledge something. This development retcons Aiden. What was previously sold as understandable doubt is now exposed as gross, systemic insecurity that goes way beyond what Carrie caused. There is nothing Carrie can do, as she rightfully points out, to bring him round. Aiden Shaw, it turns out, was always this guy, and it was only covered up by Carrie proving him right 20 years ago. Which, as predicted, effectively lets Carrie off the hook for everything she did to him in Sex and the City. Why it took the equivalent of a full season to get there is anybody's guess. This could have been a 3-episode arc. Or an email, frankly. Well, cancel my reboot. It's the Krusty Fox. I'm back again for another episode of And Just Like Crap, a salty recap and review of freshly executed Sex and the City revival series And Just Like That. This week, Carrie discovers that she's got a little English in her, and not because she just got her 23andMe results back. So get your crash helmets on as we continue our descent towards what will now be the series finale, and let's get into it.
These nuts.
You might assume, considering how furiously Season 2 of And Just Like That tried to convince us that Carrie and Aiden were endgame, that last episode's emotionally explosive breakup would have far-reaching repercussions. But, like a dodgy seafood curry, that shit rocketed its way out of Ms. Bradshaw's system overnight. That's not entirely surprising, considering she has her vile debut novel to distract her. Or, more accurately, and like all of her other writing, having her personal life blow up faster than leaked celebrity nudes is actually fantastic fodder for a writer who has zero imagination. The woman of Carrie's untitled novel, you see, was also involved with a man who, get this, returned from war but died of a wound from a previous battle. Let's hope Aiden doesn't learn how to read by the time it's published. The real victim of this nothing burger plot is writing partner Duncan, a celebrated author who is so entranced by Carrie that he's blown away by such revolutionary narrative devices as repetition, and describes her as a fairy tale. Presumably one written by Hans Christian Andersen and based on him visiting Charles Dickens. Look it up. You won't regret it. Carrie whines to Seema that she has to protect her working relationship with Duncan because it's intellectual, whereas men usually only see her as sexy and cute. Are those men in the room with us now? Knock twice for yes. Yeah, didn't think so. This storyline seemingly comes to its conclusion on the night of a party thrown by Duncan's publisher, to which Carrie wears, I do have to say, a stunning Vivienne Westwood number. See, I'm willing to acknowledge her successes when she's not dressed like she's auditioning for Pirates of Penzance or just got kicked out of an assisted living facility. Despite her misgivings, Carrie decides to act on impulse and sleeps with Duncan, who reveals the cracking body he's been hiding under all of those dowdy outfits. He also reveals that he's not interested in anything long-term and in fact is going back to London forever, which is somehow still not the worst post-shag review that Carrie's ever received. Naturally, this immediately fuels more exploits for the woman in Carrie's novel, who ends this chapter repeatedly assuring herself that everything is wonderful. And, as we all know, saying something 3 times always makes it real. Buy my merch. Buy my merch. Buy my merch. Because we're never more than a few episodes away from someone's disgusting kids consuming their screen time, this week is Miranda's turn. She hosts a family dinner at which Brady reveals that he'd like to go to culinary school. Apparently, he's been bitten by the cooking bug while working at Steve's Crab Shack. And here I was, assuming it was lice. Cod turns out not to be the only thing Brady's been shoving into ovens. When he drops the bombshell that he knocked up a buddy he barely knows while drunk.
Shame.
I mean, it's not what I would consider good news, but both Miranda and Steve's reactions are suboptimal. Steve's is, at least, understandable. Blind post-traumatic rage that Brady has made exactly the same mistake he did that ultimately landed him with the mop-topped omnishambles and lesbian ex-wife before him. Miranda, on the other hand, immediately tries to slut-shame the anonymous host of the Brady parasite, and decides she needs to take it on tour. That's how she ends up dragging Charlotte down to the salon which Mia, the incubator for her son's mutant ball bath, shampoos hair at for a bit of undercover subterfuge. Hagney and Gacy right again. Mia is, like most of this show's 20-something characters, designed at the atomic level to be the walking embodiment of the worst. She farts from her ass and shits from her mouth, explaining that she's creating a wellness app, only decided to keep the baby after realizing it'll be a double Libra, and even slips in a bit of, "Did you just assume my baby's gender?" She does, at least, take revenge on Miranda for her deception by hosing her down at the shampoo station. Joke's on her though. If there's one thing we learned from Carrie's Season 2 suppository sponsorship, it's that people of a certain age are never mad at the opportunity to get soaking wet. This week in Who Gives a Shit News? Well, I suppose the headline this week is the announcement that And Just Like That will end with this season's two-part finale, a move that everyone involved seems particularly keen not to call a cancellation. If this is the pace things move at when they supposedly know the end is coming, I'd hate to see how they'd react in the path of a speeding car. R.I.P. Anyway, Lisa's career is getting in the way of her responsibilities as a mother. Never clearer than in daughter Gabby's desperate attempt to get her attention by releasing her hamster, Shirley, into her bedroom, which leads to Lisa calling Gabby stupid. Harsh but fair, I'd say. Herbert's campaign for city comptroller ends in off-screen disaster when he loses the election despite being ahead in the polls. But then again, if you're going to base your expectations on the political analysis of son Henry's tap-dancing ass, you probably shouldn't be in any position of power. Speaking of which, youngest Goldenblatt Rock has been cast as the lead in a school production of Thoroughly Modern Millie. I'd have assumed Victor Victoria, given AJLT's usual blunt force trauma approach to subtext. And to answer your question, yes, based on the trailers, we are going to be forced to watch it. Charlotte orders a pointless hallway renovation, just to remind us she's unrelatably wealthy. She also undertakes a psychic energy cleanse over Zoom to deal with her trauma from Harry's cancer treatment. Therapy exists. Just saying. And Seema pushes boyfriend Adam's mother out of a window, but avoids a first-degree murder charge because it's just a plant that represents his already long-dead mother. So he's relaxed about a horticultural homicide. Perhaps in addition to using crystals for hygiene, he also has some nice calming amethyst rammed up his grunt hole. And Anthony and Giuseppe are interrupted mid-coitus this week by a fireman, who is there to see about some pipes, but disappointingly not in the adult film way. Instead, they're forced to evacuate to Giuseppe's apartment by a neighbour's gas line puncturing antics. A couple of things. First of all, watch the start of the scene in question. What exactly is supposed to feel good there? From that angle, the only thing he's topping is the mattress. Next, Anthony doesn't know who Giuseppe lives with. The writers of this show have a serious problem with their exposition. Just because they haven't written it before doesn't mean the characters won't have discussed it before. Come on, guys. Anywho, the sole roommate of the Italian stallion is Andrew, an ancient puppeteer who has created a spectacularly creepy mannequin of Giuseppe himself. All of which is probably just to allow Anthony to make his admittedly funny Geppetto joke. Although, an old man who works on a young boy's wood. You might want to leave that one alone, Tony. Giuseppe, however, is unfazed, largely due to Andrew's insistence that he's asexual and therefore the show seems to think no threat. It is remarkable how many shows get this wrong, because asexual does not mean aromantic. And as anybody who's been in as many dog shit relationships as I have will tell you, bonking is far from the only possible cause of a happy never after. Not that it matters, because Giuseppe discovers that, just like his marionettes, something of Andrew's grows when he lies too, and that he is a prolific puppet molester. With the door open, no less. If nothing else, you've got to admire the literally balls-out confidence. This enjoyable little diversion is in service of getting Giuseppe to accept Anthony's offer to move in with him, which he does by episode's end. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to go interfere with some well-endowed puppets. Ciao! Well, crack my cream cannon clear in half. It's the Krusty Fox. Back once more with And Just Like Crap, an only mildly corrosive recap and review of Sex and the City revival series And Just Like That. This week is the first part of the long overdue series finale, or to put it another way, half of a very haphazard attempt to bury this thing before it's even stopped twitching. Grab a shovel and let's get into it. This week, Carrie's penultimate bunch of tosh begins in a bakery. The kind of place that the show frequently tells us that she and the other ladies spend loads of time in, but which their waistlines tell us they might occasionally pass by, sniff the air and maybe lick the windows, but otherwise haven't set foot inside for the last 40 years. I can't complain though, because it allows actress Jackie Hoffman, playing the bakery's owner, a chance to do what she does best. Violently pissed off service industry worker. My personal headcanon is that this is the same character she played in 30 Rock.
Behold, the splendor of my beginning.
Glad to see she's doing well. Carrie's in there ordering a pile of Thanksgiving pies. Her contribution to Miranda's hosting effort for whatever year this is meant to be. She expresses confusion over the appropriate pie-to-person ratio, because she's not a baker. Fair enough, you've never baked before, but have you eaten before? Jesus. Perhaps wanting to remember all those other times that she didn't eat, Carrie's bakery of choice is in her old neighbourhood, which allows her to wistfully wander past her old apartment, where she bumps into poorly written and thinly veiled ghost of her youth, Lizette. Lizette informs us that she's just out of a 7-month relationship, which, for the first time, gives us a very rough sketch of how long a period of time this season has taken place over. That provides Carrie with an opportunity to claim that she's just out of a 22-year one herself. I am fairly sure that most relationships don't count time spent in a marriage to somebody else, but you do you, Bradshaw. Lizette also invites Carrie to an early Friendsgiving party. A huge mistake because it's just the opening Ms. Bradshaw needs to make it all about herself. She's having doubts, you see, about her life choices. She bought the Gramercy house for Aidan and his family of cast-iron arguments for extremely late-term A-words. And now that they're out of the picture, she's a woman without a plan. But with an old apartment that she could annex like the Eastern European dictator she almost certainly was in a past life. It gets worse when, as predicted, she admits that she's also been hoping that Duncan might be lured back from London by the distant siren call of her ham wallet. No such luck, says Seema, who explains that the basement apartment's owners want to sell, because he won't renew his lease. Just like he told her he wouldn't. I guess we can add listening comprehension to the list of things she never learned at school, along with creative writing and sex ed. The inevitable get-together at the old apartment is one of those rare occasions when I'm right there alongside Carrie. If I were her, I'd have put Lizette's head through every badly installed dividing wall I saw in there. It's now somehow 2 separate apartments because Lizette apparently can't bear to live alone, but can bear living in what amounts to an extended closet. Maybe she really is the reincarnation of Carrie's youth. I was also a little taken aback by Lizette's only real conversation being a series of questions about whether Carrie, as an older woman living alone, ever worries about the litany of things someone might do to her if they ever broke in, and that her roommate has a bunch of guns lying around. Is Lizette going to kill her? There'd be a sort of twisted circular irony to the whole thing, if so. I'm kinda here for it. The fact that the old iconic apartment is featured at all gives a fairly clear indication of what's going to happen by the end of the series. In addition to Carrie's abrupt disinterest in her multi-million-dollar house, now that there isn't a man's flapdoodle in or under it. But the one thing that we can be sure of is that, whatever they do, it won't be realistic or satisfying. The true and just like that experience. This week in Who Gives a Shit news, anybody who has seen the promo for next week's final installment of And Just Like That might just have noticed that it's labelled the season finale rather than the series finale. But sure, Michael Patrick King definitely decided to end it there while he was writing it. No sudden, unexpected cancellations to see around these parts. Move along, please. While we're on the topic, this is another episode running at less than 30 minutes, which doesn't really speak to a show still enjoying the full confidence and financial backing of its network. Or, for that matter, a show that gives one single shit about wrapping things up properly as opposed to urgently. Liza Minnelli lies, everyone. Speaking of, Giuseppe proposes to Anthony in the changing room at Bergdorf. Just the sort of fairy tale romance you'd expect from a f***ing poet. Anthony, despite saying yes, immediately has doubts because of how much he's having to mother his betrothed since they moved in together. Who knows which way they're going with this, but I will allow it because of the selection of excellent faces we got from Mr. Marantino all the way through this episode. Top marks. Herbert is dealing with last episode's election loss like an overgrown baby, begrudgingly muttering conciliatory platitudes about his apparently tacky opponent in public, but unleashing the sore loser he truly is on Lisa in private. While he's absent this episode, Hot to Trot editor Marion returns for the finale, so we'll see whether this is what pushes Lisa to get some dressing on the side next time. Seema exchanges I love yous with Adam after he goes downtown in the shower, which to be fair would probably move me to that too. Following which, he doesn't rinse off his beard. Just pointing it out. He also invites her to Thanksgiving with what we're left to assume is his equally crystal-loving, smelly armpitted sister in the next episode. Anticipate trouble. And gallery owner / Charlotte employer Mark Kasabian shows up for what appears to be no reason, but it seems he's being positioned for a more prominent role in the finale. It's always nice to see Victor Garber, but what a waste of his talent this role has been. Fingers crossed he becomes Firestorm in the next episode and nukes Carrie's house. Carrie's regrettable foray into novel writing meets with a barnstorming response from her editor, with one exception. She considers it a romantic tragedy. This is because, since it's set in 1846, the woman ending up alone would be received very differently than it would be in the modern world. But apparently she has no issue whatsoever with what looks like an extremely long story, in which the protagonist is only ever referred to as the woman. Superb editing skills on display there. Now, if I may labour the point for a moment, this is so very obviously a meta-commentary on what And Just Like That is gearing up to do with Carrie by series end. But if we put that aside and just think in universe for a second, the people reading this abomination won't have quantum leaped here from the 1800s, will they? If they can't deal with the nuance of modern norms applied to period settings, then there's probably some colouring books nearby that would be a better choice for them. And don't worry, I caught what else they're trying to do with this. This is a giant middle finger to the likes of me, who for several years now have made it their business to poke fun at the past versus present conflict in both a rewatch of Sex and the City and the struggles with that history which And Just Like That inflicted upon itself. Just like Carrie's opinion of her editor, the writers seem to be under the impression that we just don't get what they've been going for this whole time. I got it just fine, in the same way as I might get the flu. Or the clap. Despite her misgivings about it, Carrie does make an attempt to take the note and write a more hopeful epilogue to her wretched tome, in which an eligible bachelor makes a sexus ex machina return to New York from London. Where does she get these ideas? Will the woman go the honest route and end up alone? Or will Duncan be flying back for round 2? We'll find out for sure next episode. Hopefully that's enough time for me to bribe a vet and secure a heavy dose of horse tranquilizer. Miranda's objective insanity flows like a tsunami of shite into this episode from the last, when we learn that, not content with just on-screen hijinks, she's been meddling in son Brady's life off-screen too. Rather than do something useful, like having him chemically castrated, she's instead invited the hippy-dippy hemp sack her bastard grandchild will be delivered in, Mia, to Thanksgiving dinner. And without telling Brady. A move I can only assume was motivated by a desire not to see him pulling his annoying little shocked Pob face again. Which of course he does when he eventually discovers what she's done and confronts her during a date night with girlfriend Joy, whose dogs, even taking their anxiety-prone breed into account, have spent the duration of this relationship with the same look of terror they'd have if Joy accidentally sent them into one of her BBC interviews. Not that their owner seems to be faring much better. Joy, who did warn Miranda that she wasn't big into family stuff, seems to be praying for a freak lightning strike or spontaneous human combustion. Unfortunately for her, the only X-Files adjacent goings-on in that apartment are the ones caused by the poisoned genetic well that Hobbes Jr. climbed out of. And that's about it really. It's all set up in the Hobbes camp this week. Never fear though, in addition to the Baby Brady remake drama playing out, Steve's also back next time. It's like a melting pot. if what you'd melted was an explosively unstable collection of trash. Can't wait. Well, we wouldn't be on the runway to a series finale without And Just Like That taking one final chance to remind us that they ran out of ideas for Charlotte and Harry before the show even got the green light. For we are, once again, up to our collective tits in gender blending conflama. Non-binary child Rock, as threatened, takes the lead in their school's staging of Thoroughly Modern Millie, which presents two issues. First, if Rock was their strongest all-round performer, that school needs to sink some serious money into its arts program. And secondly, seeing them all dressed up in 1920s feminine glam has Charlotte freaking the f*** out about the life they might have had. Alright, I'm gonna nail my colours to the mast here. I have zero experience in raising children, a fact I am and will continue to be extremely proud of. Nor do I have any first-hand knowledge of what it means to be or be around a non-binary person. But from Charlotte's perspective, it's f***ing clothes, man. If you're gonna end up in a padded cell because the fruits of your fangita aren't going to wear a lot of fringe or sport a tight bob, that sounds remarkably like a you problem. Get over it. Far more urgent a problem, but way lower on Charlotte's priority list, is the continuing post-surgery failure to launch of Harry's horseneck clam. So, Charlotte's Season 1 gender panic gets retained, but not her disturbing Season 2 campaign on the wonders of throat yogurt. Gotcha. Charlotte closes out the episode staring mournfully at a bunch of pictures of Rock's full femme fantasy she press-ganged Carrie into taking during a truly rueful rendition of Forget About the Boy. Something I'm sure Julie Andrews and Sutton Foster would both be doing if they ever caught wind of this crime against musical theatre. Not even a single.
Raspberry!
For shame. Well, unsatisfyingly end my story. It's the Krusty Fox. Here with the final And Just Like Crap, a mildly abrasive post-mortem recap and review of Sex and the City sequel series And Just Like That. Here we are in TV hell for this last installment, as this torrid tale meets its maker. But was it a fitting send-off for the three leading ladies who can still stand being in the same room? Of course not! Grab a coin for the ferryman, and let's get into it. Let's address the fashionable elephant in the room up top, shall we? We now know, I would say fairly definitively, that And Just Like That did not end by mutual agreement. And this short, sharp fart of an episode, running to only just over 30 minutes, is the smoking heel. There is a huge difference in the viewing experience between a show that knows and plans for its end, and a show which has to scrapbook something together that vaguely resembles an ending. You can feel it. And this felt like being on the world's slowest roller coaster while people chuck handfuls of shit at you like you got caught f***ing your brother in Westeros. Carrie, Miranda, and Charlotte don't appear in a single scene at the same time. Samantha isn't even mentioned. None of the dangling plot threads are remotely resolved. The final 10 minutes features a disgusting toilet mishap, which is why this is less a swan song for the Sex and the City universe, and more like watching a startled cat kick dirt over a fresh turd before running off. As things stand, And Just Like That now exists as a strange little footnote to Sex and the City's no less problematic, but far superior legacy. And how did they choose to punctuate that footnote in their last half hour? Hoo boy. Well, they went there. Kind of. Carrie ended up alone. Or on her own. But only, if you ask me, because there wasn't time to do anything else. Like, for instance, pushing Lizette down the stairs and taking back her old apartment. But if you like this video and hit the subscribe button, I'll go do it. Here's the thing. It's actually a pretty profound development for relationship columnist and lifelong coupling enthusiast Carrie Bradshaw to make her peace with the idea of being alone. But you wouldn't know it with how AJLT chose to show it happening. My guess is that there was at least another whole season planned expanding on this idea and its reality. This is the start of a storyline, not the end. And I say that because beyond literally a couple of lines, the concept itself is about as fully explored as a shipwreck on an ocean gate dive. We get a bit of it, don't get me wrong. Most notably, Carrie dining alone with Tommy Tomato, the stuffed loneliness aide, who was slightly overshadowed by his dinner companion reacting to being handed an iPad like a caveman seeing fire for the first time. But not one note of it is allowed any time to land. At an extremely on-the-nose bridal fashion show, Carrie also admits to what we already knew. Her main motivation for marrying Big was the feeling that she'd been chosen. So, you know, not love. Just the idea of having won a pageant. Ironic, really, considering that the late Mr. Preston had the look of a man whose storage locker was packed to capacity with missing beauty queens. Charlotte, at least, gets to stay true to character by ignoring Carrie's resolve and treating her like someone who just announced their willingness to die of a curable disease. Which is why she sets her up on a surprise pity date with her boss, Mark Kasabian. He is a catch, she says, because he owns a plane. I'm not at all convinced that watching a 76-year-old man choke on a Viagra at 35,000 feet would be an improvement. Anyway, due to other events, which I'll get into later, Mark is not up for a slice of Carrie's pie, in any sense, and makes a swift exit. Which leads us to how they wrap up Carrie Bradshaw's long and winding story, by having her half-heartedly dance around her house to Barry White's "You're the First, the Last, My Everything." On the face of it, it's obviously supposed to be Carrie's little tribute to herself, harkening back to, as Michael Patrick King has proclaimed from atop his toadstool in the Mushroom Kingdom, the upbeat, self-affirming final moments of Sex and the City. Which it might have, had they done the legwork. Without that foundation, however, it read instead as an involuntarily single older woman sadly retreating to the huge empty house she bought for a man, because everyone else in her life is busy, coupled up, or both. All that's missing is a gunshot in the dark. I don't think it's out of line to say that this is a bizarre place to leave any character, but especially this character. And to be clear, not the alone part. That is how a lot of people's stories go, and it's just as likely to result in happiness as long-term relationships are to end in misery. Ask anyone who's currently in one. It's the fact that Carrie very clearly doesn't believe that. And if she doesn't, then neither do we. But then, that as an ending is only strange if it was meant to be the ending. And, once again, for the cheap seats, I will eat hay with a Sarah Jessica Parker if this was ever intended to be the last word on Carrie and Co. Maybe it's time for fan fiction to step in. Does anyone want to produce my Cloverfield and the City script? They get carpet bombed at the end, if that helps. A Thanksgiving miracle occurs when Harry, whose junk has been firmly locked in its trunk since surgery, stumbles into the kitchen to announce that his Zambona is finally ready to skim Charlotte's rink. If you know what I mean. But aside from that, we are as light on Charlotte shenanigans as we've been for all 3 series of this dumpster fire. Barring, of course, one final dive back into Rock's gender identity. The youngest Goldenblatt is forced to remind their mother that they were playing a character on stage in Thoroughly Modern Millie. Charlotte apparently having developed an illiterate medieval peasant's understanding of fiction. If they take her to see a magician next, she's f***ed. Rock also reminds their mother that there'll be a lot of different people throughout their life, which would land as a lightning-fast but otherwise acceptable conclusion to that storyline, were it not for the fact that it feels like another swipe at the audience by the writers, their asses evidently chapped by criticism of the wild personality changes they visited upon some of their older creations. And it's a weird place to put it too, considering that Charlotte, of all the returning cast, actually had the most consistent characterization, because they gave her nothing to do that would change her. She was their hostage, who they occasionally let out of her cage to see if she was capable of pulling a single recognizably human expression. Anyway, at least both Harry and Richard Burton survived the series, although both of them have to go on living in that apartment with those kids. So chances are they'll enter into some kind of pact eventually. This week in Who Gives a Shit It's Cancelled news, having spent an entire season tiptoeing around the very real possibility of directing Marion's meat balloon up her muff, Lisa decides to keep their relationship strictly professional. Oh, big whoop. I don't f*** Mehcad Brooks every single day, and you don't hear me shouting about it. Her documentary, which at this point has to be some kind of endless Black Mirror-style torture device, looks set to secure Michelle Obama as its narrator. Don't do it, Michelle. One minute you'll be in the recording booth, the next you'll wake up chained to a bathroom wall with a tape recorder and a hacksaw. Unelectable misery factory Herbert turns his frown upside down, thanks to a brief wedding vow adjacent intervention by Lisa. The big sign that he's turned the corner? He does the dishes on Thanksgiving. Next, he'll be wiping his own arse. Shoot for the stars, H-Dog. A wonderfully naked but tragically pissing Adam drops the bomb on Seema that he isn't into marriage. Good meaty stuff, right? Wrong. There's no time, you fool. She gets over it quick as a flash and decides actually it doesn't matter. Distracted perhaps by a gluten-free pie that looks like it's made of a venom symbiote that got blended to death. The embodiment of this episode's flailing dash for the finish line is Anthony and Giuseppe's engagement plot, where they speedrun the resolution of their premarital issues like they're doing 30-second improv. Giuseppe doesn't even get his out this time. Disappointing. Carrie takes one final chance to remind us that she is to writing what Katie Price is to elocution. When she rewrites the epilogue of her putrid novel to read,
The woman realized she was not alone. She was on her own.
Shouldn't that be she was on her own, but not alone, to make any sense? At least she's not typing in Courier New anymore. F***ing idiot. And Jackie Hoffman's bakery owner, now named Shauna, makes a brief but welcome return when Carrie collects her pie order, summarizing all of our feelings about And Just Like That when she declares,
I'm so f***ing exhausted.
Same girl. Miranda learns up top that Steve is the first of several guests to drop out of her Thanksgiving of ulterior motives. After last episode's explosive unplanned pregnancy confrontation with son Brady, he doesn't feel he'd contribute to the holiday spirit. Even under different circumstances, you'd have a better chance of a good time inviting Alec Baldwin to an NRA meeting. But I digress. We learn that his mother has been giving Brady socks for Christmas since he was 14, which adds an additional layer to her horror at finding them all over the floor in season 1. In all fairness, my parents would have had a similar reaction if they'd walked in on Christmas morning and accidentally kicked over a Furby that was leaking from its eyes. Joy also drops out due to one of her dogs getting sick from chowing down on a Lego brick at the dog park. Although, given the catastrophic day that her girlfriend has lined up, I wouldn't blame her if she'd wrapped a whole bucket of them in ham and scattered them like seeds. At the wax giving itself, it's revealed that the original guest list ran to 13. Miranda's dining table seats 8. And as anyone with a large family will tell you, nothing says happy holidays like tipping a badly balanced plate of piping hot food over a sofa, the carpet, and your crotch. And that's why I can only get an erection when I smell gravy. As foretold, the future mother of Brady's bastard child, Mia, shows up. And with a posse. There's screamingly camp, full-time dickhead and part-time Vogue inflictor Silvio, and the sardonic Epcot, whose Disney-loving parents evidently hated them at birth as much as their hairdresser does today. Hey, look on the bright side. They could have named you Typhoon Lagoon. And it's that very same cheese-housing lactose intolerant who causes the most disgustingly memorable moment of the episode, when they fail to ask whether Miranda's toilet can take a punch, before letting their sloppy stink box go 5 rounds with it. There are many things since the announcement that And Just Like That would be ending that I thought I might see in the final episode. But even my bingo card didn't feature a toilet bowl spitting up big fat turds, while a man who literally once played Jesus Christ screams into it. Besides which, a load of crap that refuses to flush. Too easy. This is how I know they've been baiting us, and I will not be manipulated. So, instead of a joke about that, here's a screenshot of Kim Cattrall's excellent SJP takedown. Ah, the good old days. I found it interesting that And Just Like That's final flourish was to play the Sex and the City theme instead of its usual licensed tune of the week over the credits. You could read it a number of ways. A subtle non-verbal tribute to the quarter century of history behind it. A bittersweet lament that this is, in all likelihood, the last we'll see of these characters. A reminder of better times, even. Or, and this is what I felt as it played, yet another of these show's digs at an audience that largely refused to love it the way it felt entitled to be loved. Sorry guys. Maybe make something that isn't a pile of dog shit next time?